Welcome to Northern Mystery Archives. Here we don't soften the truth and we don't skip the details. We investigate the forgotten files from the far north of Canada, the disappearances that were quietly shelved, the settlements that faded from every map, the transmissions that were never meant to be heard again. In this channel, nothing is hidden. Every fragment, every silence, every erased trail is examined with the seriousness these cases deserved but never received. If you value cold, atmospheric, minimalist investigations into the unexplained wilderness of the North, you're in the right place. Subscribe, stay close, and step with us into the files they hoped no one would ever revisit. Below, we will be speaking about the case titled Soren Blackwater, November 14th, 1993, Missing Backcountry Echoes. It all began when a ranger station stopped receiving weather transmissions from a recording post deep in the northern interior. The silence itself was not unusual. Equipment failed regularly in temperatures that dropped below -40. But when the backup systems also went silent, and then the emergency beacon, someone had to go check. What they found was a research cabin with no one inside, and a voice recorder still running, capturing nothing but wind. The file begins with a routine notation. November 14th, 1993. Weather observation post 12 Charlie, northern Saskatchewan backcountry. Primary operator, Soren Blackwater, age 34. Contract meteorological technician, 6-year employment record with parks and environmental monitoring. No disciplinary notes, no medical flags. Solo deployment to remote station, standard rotation, 4 weeks in, 2 weeks out. Expected return date, November 28th. Soren Blackwater was not the kind of person who disappeared. His background check showed military service, technical training, clean references. People who knew him described someone methodical, someone who followed procedure. His supervisor at the regional office said Soren treated isolation postings like routine work shifts. No complaints, no requests for early rotation. He submitted daily logs on time, every time for 6 years, until November 14th. The weather post was located 73 kilometers north of the nearest forestry road. No direct vehicle access. Supply runs by float plane during open water season. Snowmobile when the lakes froze solid. The cabin sat on the edge of a narrow glacial lake, hemmed in by black spruce and muskeg. A place where days shortened fast in November, where darkness lasted 16 hours and temperatures could kill in minutes without shelter. The station itself was simple, single-room timber cabin, reinforced for winter, solar panels on the roof, diesel generator backup, shortwave radio for daily check-ins. Weather instruments mounted on a tower 30 meters from the building, a small storage shed for fuel and supplies. Enough provisions to last 2 months if resupply flights were delayed. The kind of posting where self-sufficiency was not optional, it was survival. Soren's last confirmed transmission came through at 1400 hours on November 13th. Standard meteorological report, barometric pressure, wind speed, cloud cover, temperature -18 degrees Celsius. Visibility 8 kilometers. His voice on the recording was steady, professional. Nothing indicated distress, nothing suggested what was about to happen. The transmission ended with the usual sign-off. Weather post 12, Charlie, next check-in, 1400 hours, November 14th. But November 14th came and went. No transmission. The regional office noted the missed check-in, but did not immediately escalate. Missed reports happened. Radio equipment malfunctioned. Operators occasionally overslept after long shifts. Protocol allowed a 12-hour window before concern became action. By 0200 hours on November 15th, when the morning transmission also failed to come through, the situation moved from anomaly to potential emergency. What compounded the concern was the failure of the automated backup systems. The weather station transmitted telemetry data independently of the operator. Wind speed, temperature, humidity, all recorded and sent via satellite uplink every 6 hours. That system also went dark. The emergency locator beacon, designed to activate if the main power failed, remained silent. 3 separate communication systems, all offline simultaneously. That was not equipment failure. That suggested something else. By dawn on November 16th, a search and rescue coordinator had been assigned. Float plane deployment was impossible. The lakes had started to freeze, but the ice was not yet thick enough to support a landing. Helicopter was the only option. Weather conditions were marginal, winds gusting to 40 kilometers per hour, visibility reduced by blowing snow. The decision was made to wait for a break in the weather. Every hour of delay increased the risk, but sending aircraft into unstable conditions risked more lives. November 17th brought clearer skies. A Bell helicopter lifted off at 0730 hours, carrying 2 search and rescue technicians and the regional supervisor, who had last spoken to Soren Blackwater. The flight took 90 minutes, following the frozen river systems north, then cutting overland through dense forest. The weather post appeared below them just after 9 in the morning. Smoke was not rising from the chimney. No movement visible around the cabin. The helicopter circled twice before finding a clearing large enough to land 200 meters from the station. The technicians approached on foot. Snow had drifted against the cabin door, but not heavily. The door itself was closed, not forced. The windows intact. No signs of structural damage, no signs of disturbance. One technician called out. No response. They pushed the door open. The interior was cold, not freezing, but close. The diesel generator had run out of fuel. The wood stove was out, ashes long cold, and Soren Blackwater was gone. His gear remained, sleeping bag on the cot, parka hanging on a wall peg, boots beside the door, food supplies untouched. The weather log sat open on the desk, entries filled in through November 13th. The final line read, barometric pressure dropping rapidly, wind shift to northwest, temperature declining. Then nothing. No note, no explanation, just empty space where the next entry should have been. The radio equipment was functional. The technicians tested it. Clear signal, no damage. The satellite uplink had been manually disabled. Someone had switched it off. The emergency beacon, stored in a metal case near the door, had been removed from its mounting bracket and placed on the floor. Battery disconnected. Deliberate actions. Not the result of accident or system failure. Someone had intentionally severed all communication and then walked away. Outside, the search team found tracks. Footprints in the snow leading from the cabin toward the tree line. Not running, walking, a steady, measured pace. The tracks led east, away from the lake, into thick forest. The team followed for 300 meters. The trail was clear at first, then became erratic. The stride length changed. The depth of the prints varied. At one point, the tracks circled a large spruce tree 3 times before continuing deeper into the woods. Then, abruptly, the prints stopped. Not at an obstacle. Weather post 12. Charlie was not marked on most maps. It existed in forestry databases and environmental monitoring records, but casual travelers would never find it. The location was chosen specifically for its isolation. Meteorological data from remote northern sites provided critical information for weather modeling, but the posts had to be far from human activity to avoid interference. 12. Charlie sat in a region that saw fewer than a dozen people per year. Trappers occasionally passed through in winter. Float planes sometimes used the lake for emergency landings. Otherwise, it was empty. The surrounding forest was classic boreal. Black spruce, jack pine, tamarack in the wet lowlands. The trees grew dense but stunted, struggling in poor soil and short growing seasons. Beneath the canopy, the ground was spongy with moss and lichen. Muskeg patches made travel difficult. You could sink to your knees in places where the ground looked solid. In winter, the snow cover hid the terrain, making every step uncertain. People had died out here, wandering off trails, breaking through ice, succumbing to cold. The land did not forgive mistakes. The glacial lake beside the cabin was 3 kilometers long, narrow, less than 50 meters wide in most places. Depths varied from 2 meters near shore to over 30 in the center channel. The water was dark, stained brown by tannic acid from decaying vegetation. Visibility below the surface was nearly zero. In winter, the ice formed in layers, sometimes clear, sometimes milky with trapped air. Pressure ridges could form overnight as the ice expanded and contracted with temperature swings. Walking on it required constant attention. Soren Blackwater's job was to monitor this environment. Twice daily, he recorded temperature, wind, precipitation, barometric pressure. He maintained the instruments, cleared snow from the solar panels, refueled the generator. He submitted reports, archived data. It was solitary work, but not complicated. Most operators found the isolation meditative. Some found it oppressive. Psychological screening was part of the hiring process, but not everyone who passed the tests could handle the reality of weeks alone in the bush. The cabin itself was built in 1987. Standard Forestry Service design. Timber frame, insulated walls, metal roof, a single large room, roughly 6 meters by 5, wood stove in one corner, propane cook stove against the back wall, metal frame cot with thin mattress, a desk with shelves for equipment and supplies, 2 windows, double-paned, shuttered on the outside. The structure was designed to withstand heavy snow loads and high winds. It had housed dozens of operators over the years. None had reported anything unusual, until Soren. Records show that Soren Blackwater requested the 12 Charlie posting specifically. His previous rotations had been at stations closer to access roads, places where he could reach civilization within a few hours if needed. 12 Charlie was different. It was deep wilderness, the kind of posting that appealed to people who wanted distance from the world. When asked why he wanted the transfer, Soren said he appreciated the quiet. He said he worked better without distractions. His supervisor approved the request without hesitation. Soren arrived at the post on October 17, 1993. The flight in was uneventful. He unloaded his personal gear, received a briefing from the outgoing operator, and settled in. The first week's reports were normal, weather observations, equipment checks, no issues. The second week, the same. By the third week, his transmissions had become slightly more terse. Still professional, still complete, but shorter. Less conversational. The supervisor noticed but did not comment. Operators often became quieter as rotations progressed. It was normal. The area around the cabin offered little in the way of landmarks. Forest in every direction, the lake to the west, a low ridge to the north, barely 50 meters of elevation gain, no trails except game paths. Moose moved through occasionally. Wolves were heard at night but rarely seen. Black bears denned somewhere nearby, though by November they were deep in hibernation. The only human presence was the cabin, and whoever occupied it. In November, with daylight reduced to 7 or 8 hours, the darkness became overwhelming. The forest at night was absolute, no ambient light, no moon glow when clouds covered the sky, just black. Soren's personal effects, inventoried after his disappearance, revealed little. Clothing appropriate for the season, toiletries. A few books, mostly technical manuals and field guides. A journal with entries that were brief and factual, weather notes, equipment maintenance logs, no personal reflections, no mention of family or friends. One entry, dated November 10th, read, "Ice forming on the lake. Thickness approximately 4 centimeters, not safe for travel. Wind persistent from the northwest, temperature steady at -20. Nothing indicated distress or unusual concern. The weather instruments outside the cabin were functioning when the search team arrived. The anemometer spun freely. The temperature probe recorded accurate readings. The barometer showed stable pressure. All the data continued to be collected, logged automatically by backup systems that Soren had not disabled. But the human element, the observer who interpreted and transmitted that data, was gone. The machines kept working. The man did not. Interviews conducted later with previous operators at 12 Charlie produced no useful insights. None reported anything strange about the location. The cabin was solid, the equipment reliable, the isolation was challenging but manageable. One operator mentioned hearing unusual sounds at night, creaking ice, wind through the trees, distant calls that could have been wolves or owls, but nothing that suggested danger. Nothing that explained why Soren Blackwater would walk away from his post in the middle of a northern November, leaving his survival gear behind. The forest beyond the cabin was searched for 5 days. Teams on foot and by helicopter covered a 10-kilometer radius. They found nothing, no clothing, no equipment, no signs of struggle or injury. The tracks that led into the trees and then vanished remained unexplained. Some team members suggested animals had disturbed the trail. Reconstructing Soren Blackwater's final hours requires relying on the physical evidence left behind and the gaps within it. His last radio transmission was November 13th at 1400 hours. Normal in every respect. His weather log shows entries through that same evening. The final entry, made at approximately 2100 hours, noted falling temperatures and increasing wind. Routine observations. Nothing in the handwriting suggested haste or distress. The letters were even, the numbers precise. Whatever happened began after that entry was made. The condition of the cabin when discovered provides critical details. The wood stove had burned out, but logs were still stacked beside it. Soren had not run out of fuel. The diesel generator had exhausted its tank, but spare fuel cans sat full in the storage shed. He had not refilled it. The implication was clear. At some point, he stopped maintaining the systems that kept him alive. Not because he could not, but because he chose not to, or because something prevented him from doing so. The food supplies were untouched. Canned goods, dried pasta, freeze-dried meals, enough to last weeks. None had been opened recently. The last meal Soren prepared appeared to be soup, based on a pot left on the propane stove. The pot was empty, but not cleaned. A spoon lay on the desk. The propane stove had been turned off properly. These details suggest he finished eating, turned off the stove, and then left, not in panic, not in haste. He cleaned up. He shut things down. Then he walked out. The weather data provides additional context. On November 13th, the temperature dropped to minus 22 degrees Celsius. Wind speeds increased to 30 kilometers per hour. By the morning of November 14th, conditions had worsened. Minus 26 degrees, winds gusting to 45 kilometers per hour. Wind chill would have pushed the effective temperature below minus 40. Survival time outside, without proper clothing, would be measured in minutes, not hours. Yet Soren left his parka inside. His insulated boots sat beside the door. He walked out into lethal cold wearing. At most, the lighter clothing found missing from his inventory. A fleece jacket, wool pants, leather work boots, clothing adequate for moving between the cabin and the shed, but nothing more. The manual disabling of the communication systems adds another layer. The satellite uplink required accessing a control panel inside the equipment rack and flipping multiple switches, not something done by accident. The emergency beacon, removed from its bracket and battery disconnected, required deliberate action. Soren knew what he was doing. He was cutting himself off, ensuring no one could reach him, ensuring no automated systems would alert anyone to a problem. Why he did this remains unknown, but the actions were intentional. The tracks leading into the forest present the most confounding evidence. Boot prints, clear in the snow, showing a walking pace. Not running, not stumbling. Steady, deliberate steps. The stride length was consistent for the first 100 meters. Then it changed. The prints became shorter, as if Soren had slowed down. Then longer again, as if he had resumed normal pace. At the tree where the tracks circled 3 times, the prints overlapped themselves. He had stood there walking in a circle for reasons unknown, then continued east. The abrupt end of the tracks defies explanation. The final print was complete. Full boot outline, normal depth, pressed firmly into snow, approximately 8 centimeters deep. Beyond it, nothing. The snow was undisturbed, no scuff marks, no collapse, no signs of animal activity. The investigators photographed the scene extensively. They measured distances. They checked for hidden depressions or obstacles. They found nothing that explained the disappearance of the trail. One searcher described it as if Soren had been lifted straight up into the air. Another suggested he had somehow walked backward in his own prints, but the snow would have shown that. There were no backward prints. Theories began forming immediately. Hypothermia could cause confusion, disorientation. People in advanced stages sometimes removed clothing, a condition called paradoxical undressing. But Soren had left his heavy gear in the cabin, suggesting the walk outside was planned, not a symptom of exposure. Psychological break was considered. Isolation could trigger severe mental distress, but Soren's logs showed no indication of declining mental state. His entries were normal, his radio transmissions clear. He functioned normally until he did not. The possibility of an encounter with another person was investigated, but there were no signs of visitors, no snowmobile tracks, no aircraft had been in the area. The nearest human activity was over 70 kilometers away. Even if someone had reached the cabin, why would Soren disable his communication equipment before leaving? Why would he walk into the forest without survival gear? The scenario made no sense, unless he was fleeing something or following something. But there was no evidence of either. Wildlife attack was ruled out. Bears were hibernating. Wolves avoid humans unless cornered or rabid, and no wolf tracks were found near the cabin. Moose can be aggressive, but they do not pursue people into dense forest. The only predator capable of taking a grown man would be a bear, and the tracks would have been unmistakable. There were none. Whatever caused Soren to leave, it was not an animal threat. One detail noticed by the search team but not immediately reported was the condition of the cabin door. It had been closed when they arrived. Snow drifted against it, but the latch was not secured. The door could have been pushed open from outside. Normally, operators latched the door to keep wind from blowing it open. Soren, meticulous in his routines, would have latched it. The fact that it was unlatched suggested he intended to return quickly. Or someone, something, had opened the door after he left. Inside the cabin, the search team found one additional item that did not fit: a voice-activated tape recorder, sitting on the desk, still running. The device was part of the station's backup equipment, used occasionally to record verbal notes when written logs were impractical. The tape had over 6 hours of recording capacity. When played back, it contained mostly silence, wind noise, the creak of the cabin settling. Then at a timestamp corresponding to approximately 0300 hours on November 14th, a sound, faint but distinct, a low, rhythmic pulse. Not mechanical, not wind, almost organic. The official investigation into Soren Blackwater's disappearance was assigned to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Detachment responsible for the northern Saskatchewan region. The lead investigator, a constable with 15 years of experience in wilderness search and rescue, arrived at the site on November 19th. By then, the initial search teams had already combed the immediate area. The constable's task was to determine whether a crime had been committed or if this was a case of misadventure in a harsh environment. The first step was securing the cabin as a potential scene. Photographs were taken of every surface, every item. The weather logs were collected. The voice recorder and its tape were logged as evidence. Soren's personal belongings were inventoried in detail. Fingerprints were lifted from surfaces, though in a remote cabin used by multiple operators over the years, the value of such evidence was limited. What the constable hoped to find was something that did not belong. A clue to an outside presence, a reason for Soren's departure. He found neither. Interviews were conducted with everyone who had contact with Soren in the weeks before his disappearance. His supervisor described him as reliable, quiet, professional. Co-workers who had trained with him said he was competent, maybe a bit withdrawn, but not troubled. His last known communication with family had been a brief phone call in mid-October before he flew out to the post. He told his sister he would be out of contact for 4 weeks. She noted nothing unusual in his tone or demeanor. He sounded normal. He sounded fine. The constable reviewed Soren's employment file. No disciplinary issues, no complaints. Psychological evaluations from his initial hiring showed a stable personality profile, low anxiety, high self-sufficiency, comfortable with solitude. These traits made him ideal for remote postings, but they also meant he was less likely to seek help if he encountered trouble. The file included medical records, no chronic conditions, no medications, no history of mental health treatment. On paper, Soren Blackwater was the last person who should vanish without explanation. A detailed search grid was established, extending 15 kilometers in all directions from the cabin. Ground teams worked in tandem with helicopter overflights. They looked for clothing, equipment, any sign of passage. Frozen lakes were checked for breaks in the ice. Riverbanks were walked. Dense thickets were pushed through. The effort involved over 30 personnel working in rotating shifts for 8 days. They found nothing. No trace of Soren beyond the boot prints that ended inexplicably in the forest. The scale of the wilderness made it clear that a person could disappear completely, but usually there were clues. Torn fabric, a dropped item, disturbed ground. Here, there was nothing. The voice recorder tape became a focal point. The sound captured at 0300 hours was analyzed by audio technicians. They isolated the frequency, amplified the signal, filtered out background noise. The result was clearer but no more understandable. The rhythm was steady, approximately 1 pulse per 2 seconds. The tone was low, below 100 hertz. It did not match any known animal call. It did not match wind or ice sounds. One technician described it as resembling a heartbeat. Another said it was more like distant machinery. Neither explanation fit the context. There was no machinery at the cabin capable of producing that sound, and if it was organic, what creature made it? Investigators considered the possibility that Soren had staged his own disappearance. People vanish intentionally for many reasons: financial trouble, legal issues, desire to start over. But Soren's background check revealed nothing. No debts, no criminal record, no indication he wanted to escape his life. His bank accounts, monitored after his disappearance, showed no activity. His identification documents remained wherever he kept them. If he planned to vanish, he did so without the usual preparations. No new identity, no hidden assets, no transportation waiting. It seemed implausible. Another theory explored was that Soren had suffered a sudden medical event, a stroke, a seizure, something that caused confusion and impaired judgment, but the evidence did not support it. His actions before leaving the cabin were deliberate. Disabling communication equipment requires fine motor control and clear thinking. Walking into the forest, even in a compromised state, should have left signs of distress, stumbling, falls. None were present. The boot prints were steady until they ended. Medical emergency did not fit. The constable requested a specialist in wilderness behavior to review the case. The specialist, a psychologist who studied decision-making under extreme conditions, spent 3 days examining the evidence. Her conclusion was unsettling. Soren's actions, she said, were consistent with someone responding to an external stimulus, not fleeing, not exploring, following. She could not explain what he might have been following, but the pattern of his movements, the deliberate disabling of communication, the abandonment of survival gear, suggested he believed he needed to go somewhere immediately and that safety equipment was unnecessary. Why he believed this remained a mystery. One investigator proposed a scenario involving disorientation, the cabin's isolation, the extended darkness of northern November, the monotony of routine, all could contribute to a psychological state where reality became blurred. Soren might have experienced a dissociative episode, a break from awareness where he acted without conscious thought. The theory had merit, but did not explain the calculated steps he took. Disassociation typically results in wandering, not purposeful action. Soren had been purposeful. He shut things down. He disabled systems. Then he left. The boot prints remained the most analyzed piece of evidence. A forensic team recreated the walk, measuring stride length, depth of impression, angle of foot placement. They determined Soren's walking pace had been consistent with someone moving calmly over familiar ground. No signs of running, no signs of hesitation, until the circle around the tree. That behavior suggested confusion or indecision. Or perhaps he was waiting. The prints that resumed after the circle were slightly deeper, suggesting he might have been carrying something or had increased his pace. But nothing was missing from the cabin inventory that he could have picked up in the forest. The abrupt termination of the tracks was examined by multiple specialists. Trackers with decades of experience in northern environments studied the site. They ruled out wind erasing the trail. Wind would leave evidence. They ruled out animal interference. No tracks were present. They considered snow melt and refreeze obscuring prints. But the weather data showed no warming period. The snow depth was consistent across the area. The final conclusion was baffling. The tracks ended because Soren stopped walking forward, but there was no indication he turned back, no indication he climbed, no indication he fell. He simply was there, then was not. By early December, the investigation stalled. All leads had been pursued. All evidence had been analyzed. Soren Blackwater had disappeared from a remote northern cabin under circumstances that defied logical explanation. The case was officially classified as a missing person investigation with no evidence of foul play, but no evidence of accidental death. It remained open, but active efforts ceased. The cabin was sealed. The weather post was decommissioned. Another station elsewhere took over its data collection duties. At the end, Charlie was abandoned. One final detail emerged months later. A trapper working a line 40 kilometers south of the cabin reported finding a leather work boot in the spring of 1994. The boot was wedged in a tree branch 3 meters above the ground. The trapper, familiar with the area, said the tree stood beside a frozen creek. The boot matched the description of what Soren had been wearing, but it was a single boot, the right one. No sign of the left, no sign of Soren. Over the years since Soren Blackwater's disappearance, various theories have been proposed. Some are grounded in environmental factors, others venture into speculation. None have been proven. The case remains unsolved, filed in archives that collect similar stories of people who walked into the northern wilderness and never returned. What follows is an examination of the most discussed explanations, each with supporting evidence and significant flaws. The environmental disorientation theory suggests that Soren became lost due to a whiteout or sudden weather change. Blowing snow can reduce visibility to 0 in minutes. Landmarks disappear. Direction becomes uncertain. Experienced outdoorsmen have perished within meters of shelter because they could not find their way back. This theory accounts for why Soren might have walked into the forest. Perhaps he stepped outside briefly, intending to check equipment, and was caught in conditions that disoriented him. He wandered, grew colder, and succumbed to hypothermia. His body could be lying beneath snow and vegetation, undiscovered. But this theory does not explain the disabled communication equipment. It does not explain why he left without his parka, and it does not explain the boot prints that ended without cause. The psychological break theory is more complex. Isolation affects people differently. Some thrive, others deteriorate. Even individuals who pass screening can experience delayed psychological responses to prolonged solitude. Soren had been alone for 4 weeks. The darkness of November, the cold, the silence, all could have accumulated into a breaking point. He might have experienced a dissociative fugue state, a condition where a person acts without full awareness. In such a state, he could have left the cabin and walked into the forest, driven by internal compulsion rather than external threat. This explains the lack of survival gear. He was not thinking clearly, but it struggles to explain the deliberate disabling of equipment. Fugue states involve automatic behavior, not calculated action. Soren's steps were calculated. The external encounter theory is among the most debated. This suggests Soren encountered another person or group. Perhaps someone arrived at the cabin, someone he did not expect. The interaction led him to leave, but who would be 70 kilometers deep in the wilderness in mid-November? Trappers are possibilities, but all known trappers in the region were accounted for. Illegal activity, smuggling or poaching, could bring people into remote areas. If Soren witnessed something he should not have, he might have been forced to leave. But there were no signs of struggle. No evidence of additional people at the cabin, no tracks other than his own. If someone took him, they left no trace. Wildlife theory, though largely dismissed, persists in certain discussions. Some argue that an aggressive animal, perhaps a wolf or wolverine, could have driven Soren from the cabin. Wolverines are rare but known for boldness. A wolverine entering a cabin could cause someone to flee, but wolverines leave evidence. Scat, tracks, damage to supplies. None were present. And it does not explain the voice recording. The sound captured was not identifiable as any known northern animal. If an animal was involved, it was something outside the usual catalogue of species. Another theory involves ice and water. The glacial lake beside the cabin was freezing, but not solid. If Soren walked onto the ice and broke through, he could have been pulled under by current or trapped beneath the surface. Bodies lost in water can remain hidden for years, especially in deep, cold lakes. But the boot prints did not lead toward the lake. They led into the forest. And the single boot found in a tree 3 meters above ground contradicts the drowning scenario, unless the boot was moved by someone or something after the fact, which raises more questions. One of the more unsettling theories is that Soren left because he was drawn to something. Not fleeing, not lost, following. The voice recorder captured a sound at 0300 hours. Suppose that sound was something Soren heard, something that compelled him to investigate. People in isolated environments sometimes report auditory phenomena, low-frequency sounds that seem to come from nowhere. Infrasound, below the threshold of conscious hearing, can cause feelings of unease, disorientation, even hallucinations. If Soren heard such a sound and attributed meaning to it, he might have believed he needed to follow it. This theory is speculative, but it fits the pattern: the deliberate departure, the abandonment of gear, the steady walk into darkness. He believed he was going somewhere important. The theory of staged disappearance resurfaces periodically. Perhaps Soren wanted to vanish, Perhaps he planned it meticulously. He disabled communication to delay discovery. He walked into the forest and continued beyond the search perimeter. He emerged elsewhere, assumed a new identity, and started over. But this requires logistics. How did he survive the cold without gear? Where did he go? No sightings of him have ever been confirmed. No activity on his identification or accounts. If he planned to disappear, he executed it flawlessly, too flawlessly. Most staged disappearances unravel within months. Soren's has not. Another explanation involves map-making errors. What if the terrain around the cabin was not as recorded? What if there were features, sinkholes, caves hidden beneath the snow? Soren could have fallen into a concealed opening, a place where the boot prints ended because the ground gave way. Subsequent snow could have sealed the opening, hiding it from searchers. This theory has support. The region is glacially carved, full of karst formations and subsurface voids. A person could vanish into such a feature and never be found. But the ground around the final boot print was probed. No voids were detected, no collapses. Some theories veer into the speculative and will not be detailed here, but they exist in the folklore around the case. Lights seen in the northern sky that night. Stories from indigenous communities about places where people should not go. Warnings unheeded. These are not part of the investigative record. They are stories people tell when rational explanations fail. Whether there is truth beneath them or simply the human need to explain the inexplicable is unknown. What remains factual is this. Soren Blackwater left Weather Post 12 Charlie on or around November 14th, 1993. He disabled communication systems before leaving. He walked into the forest without adequate clothing or survival equipment. His tracks led east for several hundred meters before ending abruptly. A single boot was found months later, kilometers away, in a tree. The file on Soren Blackwater remains open in the archives of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. It is one of dozens from the northern regions where people have disappeared under circumstances that defy standard explanation. Some of those files eventually close when remains are found. Some close when enough time passes that death is presumed. Soren's file has not closed. No remains, no resolution. Just a stack of reports, photographs, and unanswered questions. Weather Post 12. Charlie was never reoccupied. After Soren's disappearance, the decision was made to decommission the station. Automated equipment could collect most of the necessary data without requiring a human presence. The cabin was sealed, windows boarded, door locked. Occasionally, maintenance crews visit to check the instruments. They do not stay long. The site has a reputation now. People avoid it when possible. Not because of fear, exactly, but because it feels wrong. That is how one technician described it. The place feels wrong. In the years since 1993, there have been scattered reports from the area. Hunters passing through mention strange lights over the lake at night. Trappers report hearing sounds they cannot identify. A forestry survey team working 10 kilometers west of the cabin in 2002 claimed their equipment malfunctioned repeatedly. Compasses spinning, GPS units losing signal. They completed their work and left quickly. These reports are anecdotal. They do not constitute evidence, but they contribute to the unease around the location. Soren's family held out hope for years. His sister organized search efforts privately, hiring guides to retrace the area each summer. Nothing was found. By the mid-2000s, the searches stopped. Soren's mother passed away in 2009 without learning what happened to her son. His father followed in 2012. His sister, the last remaining immediate family, moved away from the region. She declined interviews. The case became a cold file, referenced occasionally in discussions of northern disappearances, but no longer actively pursued. One investigator who worked the case in its early days returned to the cabin in 2015. He had retired from the RCMP and wanted to see the site again. He hiked in during summer when the terrain was accessible without snow machines. The cabin was as it had been left, weathered, silent. He spent an hour there, walking the perimeter, standing where the tracks had ended. He later said he felt watched, not threatened, but observed. He left before evening and did not return. The voice recorder tape was digitized and stored in evidence archives. Copies exist in audio forensic databases, analyzed periodically as new technology becomes available. No advances in analysis have identified the sound. It remains an unknown frequency pattern captured in the early hours of November 14th, 1993. Some who have listened to it describe a feeling of discomfort. Others hear nothing unusual. The sound is there, documented, unexplained. Theories continue to circulate. Online forums dedicated to missing persons cases revisit Soren's story periodically. New explanations are proposed, old ones are debated. None gain traction beyond speculation. The physical evidence is limited, the witness accounts non-existent, the environment harsh and unforgiving. The case resists resolution. It remains a fragment of a story with no ending. In the broader context of northern disappearances, Soren Blackwater's case is not unique. The wilderness takes people. Sometimes their bodies are found, sometimes they are not. What makes this case distinct is the deliberateness of his departure, the disabled equipment, the abandoned survival gear, the tracks that ended. Most people who vanish in the wilderness do so as victims of miscalculation or misfortune. Soren's actions suggest something else, a purpose, a destination, a reason known only to him. The question that haunts investigators is simple. What did he hear? What did he see? What compelled a rational, experienced man to walk into lethal cold without protection? If we knew that, we might understand what happened, but we do not know. The recording offers a clue, but not an answer. The boot in the tree offers a location, but not an explanation. Everything about the case points towards something that should make sense, but does not. The northern wilderness holds many secrets. Bodies buried under snow and moss, cabins reclaimed by forest, trails erased by time. Soren Blackwater joined those secrets on November 14, 1993. Whether he will ever emerge from them is a question that may never be answered. The file remains open, the case remains unsolved. The mystery endures, and somewhere deep in the Saskatchewan backcountry, weather post 12. Charlie still stands. The instruments no longer transmit. The cabin is dark. The lake freezes and thaws with the seasons. The forest presses close, and if you were to walk the tree line at night, if you were to stand where the boot prints ended all those years ago, you might hear something. A low, rhythmic sound, a pulse in the darkness. Or perhaps it is only the wind. Perhaps it is nothing at all, but the people who have been there, the ones who have walked that ground and felt the weight of the silence, they do not believe it is nothing. They believe something happened to Soren Blackwater, something that does not fit the categories we use to explain disappearances. And they believe that whatever it was, it is still there, waiting, watching, in the cold and the dark of the northern wilderness where no one goes anymore.